Time magazine called him the unsung hero behind the internet. CNN called him a father of the internet. President Bill Clinton called him one of the great minds of the information age. He has been voted history's greatest scientist of African descent. He is Philip Emeagwali. He's coming to Trinidad and Tobago to launch the 2008 Kwame Ture lecture series on Sunday, June 8th at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine, 5 p.m. The Emancipation Support Committee invites you to come and hear this inspirational mind address the theme, crossing new frontiers to conquer today's challenges. This lecture is one you cannot afford to miss. Admission is free, so be there on Sunday, June 8th, 5 p.m. at the JFK Auditorium, UWI St. Augustine.
My contribution to large-scale algebra was that I discovered that those algebraic errors that occurred at the end of each of my parallel processed supercomputer cycle of floating point arithmetical computations contradicted the second law of motion of physics. My contribution to calculus was that I discovered that critical error in the system of 9 coupled nonlinear 3-dimensional 3-phased and time-dependent partial differential equations that governs the flow of injected water, crude oil, and natural gas flowing across a production oil field. My contribution to petroleum geology was that I corrected that critical error, and I corrected it not merely on one central processing unit, but across my new global network of 65,536 central processing units that I programmed to solve 65,536 systems of equations at once. My mathematical physics quest of the 1970s and 80s was for a more accurate way to encode the second law of motion of physics and to encode that law into the partial differential equation of calculus. I discretized those partial differential equations into the partial difference equations of algebra. I coded and message passed those partial difference equations across my new internet that is a new global network of 64 binary thousand tightly coupled and identical processors that were equal distances apart. My contribution to extreme scaled computational physics was that I discovered how to solve the grand challenge problem of computational physics. I discovered how to solve the grand challenge problem and how to solve it across a new internet that emulates one new cohesive supercomputer that in turn parallel processes that grand challenge problem and do so across an ensemble of millions upon millions of commodity off-the-shelf processors. I did not conduct my research experiments to discover new laws of physics. I experimented to discover a new law of the massively parallel supercomputer that I believed will become the computer of tomorrow. My experiment made the news headlines because I defied the Amdahl's law of parallel processing that was formulated in April 1967 and that limits speedups in parallel computing to a factor of 8. The supercomputer textbooks described Amdahl's law as the fundamental limit in the speed of parallel supercomputers that are now used to solve the toughest problems arising in physics and mathematics. I was in the news headlines shortly after my discovery of practical parallel processing. That discovery occurred on the 4th of July, 1989, and occurred in Los Alamos, New Mexico, United States. The parallel supercomputer was first mentioned in print in 1958. In the 3 decades onward of 1958, solving the toughest problems by chopping them up into 1,000,000 smaller problems and then parallel processing them across 1,000,000 processors was science fiction and not computer science. And practical parallel processing was first formulated as science fiction back on February 1, 1922, or 67 years before it made the news headlines that I discovered it. At computer conferences of the 1960s, a hotly debated topic was this: is parallel processing a huge waste of everybody's time? Back in April 1967, the American Federation of Information Processing Societies organized a debate between 2 supercomputer pioneers, namely Gene Amdahl and Daniel L. Slotnick. That supercomputer debate was titled, quote, "The Best Approach to Large Computing Capability, a Debate," unquote. Gene Amdahl defended the use of only one processor and defended sequential processing, or computing only one thing at a time, and defended that technology in his famous supercomputing paper that was published at the conference's proceedings and that was titled, quote, "Validity of the Single Processor Approach to Achieving Large-Scale Computing Capabilities," unquote. In a nutshell, Gene Amdahl argued that a grand challenge problem cannot be chopped up into thousands or millions or billions of smaller problems that can then be solved with a one-to-one correspondence with as many identical processors. On the opposing side of that April 1967 supercomputer debate was Daniel L. Slotnick, who argued that up to 256 processors could be harnessed, and argued in favor of parallel processing, and did so in his scientific paper that was titled Unconventional Systems. That paper of Gene Amdahl was presented and published by the American Federation of Information Processing Societies. That paper was published in pages 477 through 481 of the proceedings of the April 18 to 20, 1960 Joint Computer Conference that took place in Silicon Valley, California. Gene Amdahl won that supercomputer debate, and his victory gave rise to the term Amdahl's Law. Amdahl's Law was often cited by the likes of Seymour Cray, the man that designed 7 intense supercomputers of the 1980s. Amdahl's Law was cited to argue that fewer than 8 processors should be incorporated within a parallel supercomputer. After that debate, Amdahl's Law became the two-word argument against the parallel supercomputer. After that debate of 1967, Amdahl's Law became to computer science textbooks what the law of diminishing returns was to economics textbooks. Gene Amdahl's victory at that debate of 1967 was reaffirmed 9 years later at a second debate at the National Computer Conference in New York City. That second debate was published in the June 14, 1976 issue of the Computer World magazine. It was published as an article that ridiculed, mocked, and rejected the massively parallel processing supercomputer. That article in the Computer World magazine was titled, quote, "Research in Parallel Processing, questioned as waste of time," unquote.
Insightful and brilliant lecture.